Hello, everybody. This is Aaron Lolito here to introduce our second podcast interview, which is a conversation with a writer named Erica Avey. She's had quite an interesting path so far, and she's able to share a bit of it with us. And if you look at our website, there's going to be a link to her website, ericaavey.com, and that's where you can see her social media, her Instagram, Twitter, and some of her links to articles she's written. She's been published in such places as Medium, Symposia, and Psychedelic Press UK. So there's 3 or 4 articles, and I highly recommend that you check some of those out, especially if you are interested in the psychedelic world. I came across Erica's writing, and her creative writing actually, in the website called The Closed Eye Open. And their current issue features a series of her short poems that's titled Poems for Pedro. And I've added a link to this issue also, so you can check that one out too. In addition, there's actually some great reading recommendations in maybe the second half of this conversation. So you'll have a few items to add to your reading list after you listen to us here. And it's also worth mentioning that Erica is starting a new publication, which is called Spectra Poets. That's yet to be released, so it's something to look forward to in 2021. But you can look up at Spectra Poets on Instagram. There's an Instagram account up. And just to let you know, there's no posts yet, but I'm sure she would appreciate if you want to follow it, if you are interested in that publication and what she is able to share with us in this interview. Feel free to follow that account, and when there is news to post, that just makes it kind of easier to get the word out. And there's plans for the first issue coming out in 2021. And just on a side note, I'm planning to release one of these episodes every month. So this one will be posted in December. So you can check back to our website in the future to get more, starting in January. January, oddly enough, will be when our next issue, issue 6, will be released as well. So that'll be part of our upcoming issue. In addition, you could follow us at Wild Roof Journal on Instagram and get the updates. We typically feature artists on our Instagram account. You'll get the updates for when our issues are released, and even some of these upcoming interviews that'll be coming out. So I hope you enjoyed this conversation. I'll talk to you later. So yeah, the first thing that I wanted to touch on is maybe to get a little bit about your background as a writer. The kind of my stock question as an opener is maybe even a formative experience that you've had that you remember that's especially important.
Yeah. So I think it started with an obsession with music lyrics, starting when I was, I don't know, in elementary school. I've loved music, has been a big part of my life, and I would memorize the lyrics. It felt like my brain at a young age was just all lyrics. So that was definitely my introduction to loving words in poetry.
Sure.
And in college, I would have to say in high school and college, I was a bit of a bad girl. I wasn't very studious. I was mostly skipping class and taking drugs and smoking a lot of weed with friends. So I can't say that I was reading or writing a lot in school. But after school, I went into marketing actually, and was doing content writing for Ticketfly, which is a ticketing company for independent venues and larger festivals like Burning Man. So I was managing their content, writing all their newsletters, and started actually writing in a very sterile marketing sense. And then started writing also for a female health company called Clue. and really loved writing for work and those jobs. But it was kind of outside of those jobs that I started realizing that like I needed to be writing for myself as well. And I was just journaling a lot and always writing a lot of poems from my early 20s. Um, so it actually started in a very, um, career based way, because I studied marketing in college. And now I'm pretty far outside of marketing and doing more journalism and poetry.
Sure, nice. I remember loving music myself, especially um, in the adolescent years and growing up. Was there anything in particular that you remember that was an influence?
Yeah, so my dad would sing to us every night before bed, even as I was a baby, and he loved The Doors and Pink Floyd and Zeppelin and The Who. So I remember him singing to us "Riders on the Storm" as a really, and there was another one I'm forgetting now that he were like regular songs, like bedtime lullabies. So I grew up listening to a lot of his music from the 60s and 70s, and I was so close to my dad growing up that I just wanted to know all the music he grew up with. So it was kind of downloaded into my brain from a very young age. And then in high school and middle school, I started listening to a lot of hip hop and rap. And I just like loved how intelligent the poetry was of a lot of music I was listening to later on my own as well. Um,
Sure. One of the things that struck me, I mean, maybe only a couple of years ago, I had the thought of like how much music lyrics, like you mentioned, kind of shaped and made probably even my tastes in literature and like even poems or short stories, just in the sense of like how evocative a song could be in the lyrics and how little you get, but how much you can get out of it, or how much pathos can be built into something where you only get a couple of pieces of maybe a person's story or a
yeah,
couple of references. I tend to like poems or stories that are kind of similar in that way.
yeah,
So
yeah,
that was an interesting connection.
yeah, definitely.
Are there any certain maybe types of experiences you tend to draw on for your more creative writing and your poetry?
Yes, definitely. So I lived abroad for 5 years, and that experience of being outside of the US and kind of getting outside of where I originated and grew up, that totally altered the way I see the world and the way I perceive everything. So living abroad definitely impacted my writing. And love, I've been heartbroken a few times. That's definitely in there as well. And psychedelics too, for sure. Psychedelic experiences and just general exploration of consciousness, whether it be a trip abroad, whether it be a trip using DMT in my room, or falling in or out of love. Those are the main three, I'd say.
Yeah, and that it connects to how I became familiar with you in a way. Um, and I will put a link to the Closed Eye Open publication, and you had a poem selected that's in their most recent issue. So there'll be a link on our page to that publication. Um, but yeah, that was how I kind of got familiar with you from that. And that poem specifically, I believe the title was "Poem for San Pedro."
Yeah, it was poems for Pedro, and
Okay.
I took San Pedro and had a really wonderful, odd, beautiful day, and wrote a bunch of poems. And I really wish I could someday share the original notebook, because the way I was writing, like the curly cues of the letters and everything, is just very psychedelic, and um, I love it. Yeah, it was a great experience. So those poems, yeah, they seemed to be kind of straight from the substance itself, and also I was going through a heartbreak at the time, so it was just a lot happening. But
Yeah, that would be interesting to actually have it more as like a visual piece to actually see the notebook page.
yeah,
Um, and I tend to like that idea myself, even even just as a way of maybe brainstorming or writing.
Yeah.
Sometimes I'll just literally just draw a circle in my notebook page and write a bunch of things maybe over the course of a week, like outside of the circle. Then I'll
Yeah.
put pieces together in this. So it's just a way to like more visualize what is essentially some random things or random words and phrases that I might come across.
Yeah.
But point is, yeah, that the actual visual nature of a notebook page is might be a kind of a cool idea for a future project.
There's something really raw about it, and I'm hoping. So I'm working on Spectra
Yeah,
Poets, this poetry journal, and I'm hoping at some point to potentially have a few highlighted poets in each journal and having them handwrite the poems. It's there's something about that, and also just, I mean, you don't often see into people's journals, so it is very intimate, and there's something kind of eerie about it. Like you're seeing directly into someone's. I mean, when you're reading someone's writing, you are seeing directly into their mind, but when you're seeing how it actually came pen to paper, it's beautiful. Yeah.
and there's something maybe intuitive about it too, where obviously the finished piece of maybe a poem, let's say, should probably go through some revisions, and the writer should take care on for what what you're doing with it, how it's all that stuff. Um, but it is that reminder of like sometimes you find those happy accidents when you don't expect to put things together in a certain way, but it just happens.
Yeah.
So there is that kind of intuitive nature of a notebook too that you might not, when you're writing it, or you might not plan for it to be maybe a piece of art that gets published or something like that. But looking back, it could be placed in a different context. So that's kind of a cool concept. I do want to touch on the Spectra thing, but maybe we'll save that for a little bit later. I did notice you were profiled in The Guardian and maybe another piece. Um, so I was just curious, or how did your story in particular get kind of a high profile in the sense of like you were part of a larger article in The Guardian and maybe Psychology Today. So I
Yeah.
mean, how did that happen?
I wrote about microdosing when I started experimenting with that a few years ago in 2017, and my article, I think it was just partly luck, and my article just got great SEO. So anytime you would search microdosing, my experience would come up in the first page of results. So that's pretty much why. And I just had journalists reaching out to me who were doing research and trying to talk to people microdosing, and it just all kind of fell into place. Um, yeah, that was an interesting time.
Right. Were you happy that, I mean, were you happy with how that kind of turned out? Because it wasn't a piece you wrote, just to be clear. It was just kind of something that your story was a part of a larger article. So, I mean, what was it? Did that turn out to be beneficial for you?
Yeah. Hmm. I think it was. I think I was happy with that because a few years ago, microdosing was super helpful to me, and I did want. I think it became part of this larger trend around like self improvement that got a bit kind of felt a bit icky. Um, but I do think any conversations that are normalizing certain psychedelic use and just showing that like this isn't the scariest, worst, most gnarly thing we could be experimenting with. I think that that is beneficial. Personally, for me, it didn't. I didn't get too much out of it. But I do think the larger what it did for the larger conversation about psychedelics was probably beneficial, even if in a small way. Some good ripples probably came of it. So
Sure, that was one of the things I found interesting about some of your own writing, some of the articles you've done. I kind of had the sense, or maybe it was specifically stated that maybe there was a tension, and you used the word icky, so that's what triggered my memory of it. But there was kind of maybe a more trend for that productive use. So it's kind of tied to the productivity idea,
yeah,
and that obviously became slightly more accepted in certain
yeah,
circles,
yeah.
versus maybe the more personal self-development, experimental use.
Yeah, so I used microdosing mostly for mood balancing, but when I was using it at work, it made me very aware of the office environment and certain dynamics in the office that weren't the healthiest. So it made me a bit hypercritical of my surroundings and just the way the environment I was in was working. And so I think the whole narrative around using psychedelics to like boost your career, kind of level up, I think it can make you a bit more cynical than that in some ways that might not actually be very helpful. It Yeah, especially I'm in San Francisco and like in the tech scene. I've seen the use there, and I do think that I think if you're actually diving into these substances and really experimenting with smaller and larger doses, then I think you're actually going to maybe start questioning the way that you're living, the way that you're working, what you're actually contributing. So that's where I started getting into this spiral of like, what is all this talk about using this to optimize yourself when the environment and the systems we're in probably need to be optimized as well.
Yeah, that's interesting in itself. Yeah. And I think it sounds like it was more of maybe it was more of an intentional positioning as far as you're obviously not opposed or not overly skeptical of these experiences because you have certain benefits from them and probably just have an interest in it, but not over advocating, which I think could be another trap.
Yes, I think initially I was probably more of an advocate, and now I'm a bit more skeptical. I still think these substances are incredible, and I don't judge anyone's use of them. Um, but I wrote an article recently that was in Symposia about so basically one of the founders of what is it? Extinction Rebellion in the UK. She was calling for psychedelic civil disobedience, and she basically put out there saying everyone should take psychedelics and the world will be a better place. And I just commented on that and did some research. And I mean, a lot of people do psychedelics and still stay in their same ways of being. And for example, a lot of neo Nazis love psychedelics. A lot of people take psychedelics and confirm their own beliefs, and they don't really break out of their patterns. So, I think it can easily get into the realm of idealism, and I definitely am not an evangelist anymore. But I still think they're great. I still think they're very powerful medicines. So I'm still positive about them, and they still give me hope that some good will come from more people using them. But I'm definitely not. I don't think they're going to save humanity or the world.
Right, absolutely. Yeah, thanks for clarifying. I did come across that. I don't know how long ago it was that you mentioned the Extinction Rebellion thing. It was probably within the last year, right?
Yeah, it was about a year ago. Yeah.
Yeah, and I guess exactly. You have to kind of take some form of a middle path, I think, because it obviously can be a great way to shift consciousness, but I guess it's probably is harmful to see it as a quick fix, or just as maybe a shortcut. So yeah, that's definitely that was an interesting kind of offshoot. We don't want to spend too much time on psychedelics, I guess, but I see all those books behind you, and one of the questions I like to ask, because the Wild Roof Journal, one of the things that is kind of an emphasis is that it shares both visual artists and written work. So I tend to ask the writers if they have any favorite visual artists, and the artists if they have any favorite writers. But I guess since I see all the books, maybe you could, if you have a recommendation or any particular favorites.
Yeah. Recently, I've been reading a lot of Clarice Lispector, and she's from Brazil, and incredible. The way she wrote just completely changed my perspective on like what's possible. Her writing is very ethereal and bizarre and stream of consciousness. Just it's incredible. So I would say she's my favorite writer.
Okay, I'm not familiar with her. What's can you say the name again?
Clarice Lispector.
Okay.
Yeah, I would say Agua Viva is one of her most famous works, but my favorite, and what she would consider, I think, her favorite, is this book called The Passion According to G.H. Um, just bizarre and very divine, and it just, yeah, she's some of the Brazilian writers from the last 100 years are now some of my favorites. There's also Hilda Hills. Hilda Hit. How do you say her name? Hilda Hilst. Where is her book? I have a bunch in front of me right now as well. Oh yeah, um, Hilda Hilst. She's also a great writer. Yeah, I mean, there's so many. It's really hard to say. Also, some of the Portuguese writers, Paseo and Saramago. Um, I recently was married to a guy from Colombia, so he really opened my eyes to a lot of the South American writers, and then also the writers from some writers from Spain and Portugal. I realized that I hadn't read any writers from South America, and yeah, I mean, there's so many. It's really it's kind of
Yeah,
even overwhelming.
those are some
But
good recommendations. Yeah, I'm not familiar with those writers, so that would be
yeah, I mean,
worth
Claire's
a
sister
look.
is incredible. When I was in Mexico City recently, I walked by a cafe that was called Lispector Literature Cafe, and I just walked in there and it was so cool that they had a cafe for her, because I think in South America she's considered one of the, or Central and South America she's considered one of the greats. So yeah.
Nice. There's too much to read. Have you found that as well? Because I got a little bit overwhelmed even just yesterday doing a little bit of searching on what I wanted to read next.
I know. It's really overwhelming. I don't even know what I'm going to read next. I'd say I've probably read, and I have a bunch more books in my bedroom. I'd probably have read only like a third to 40% of the books that I have. So I always have all these options, but it's overwhelming. It really is. I've been reading a lot of poetry this year because 2020, my attention span is very, very impacted. So poetry and the white space of poetry has been a bit more accessible this year for me. I was reading Demons by Dostoevsky, and I got like 300 pages in, and I've kind of hit a wall. And I love it. It's a great book, but my attention span this year is totally shot.
Yeah, I think there is something to that. It's just I kind of tending to not seek out the more dense even novels. I haven't read a novel in quite a
You
bit in too long, and that's usually my probably the favorite type of reading that I do, even just for leisure reading.
Yeah.
And yeah, so I think you might be onto something a little bit more, not so dense in terms of concept, but just just a little bit more manageable.
Yeah. What nonfiction have you been reading?
Nonfiction, you know what I'm in the middle of, and it's been on my shelf probably for 20 years, is Howard Zinn's The People's History of the United States.
Okay.
So I probably read a couple chapters here and there over the years, but I've never made my way all the way through it. So I was just reading that a little bit this morning. And the other one I was looking into, actually, I just looked it up yesterday. It's called The Immortality Key. It's a new one.
Yes, I have it, and I want to read it.
Okay, so that looks pretty fascinating in its own. So I want to get that.
Yeah, I really look forward to reading that. I mean, I listened to his podcast. He was on Joe Rogan, and
Oh, really?
yeah, he was on there with who was the other guy who wrote Supernatural in America Before?
Oh, Graham Hancock.
Yeah, Graham Hancock, and I'm forgetting the name of the author of Immortality Key, but they were both on, and it was a fascinating interview. I mean, just hearing about ancient Greece and the psychedelic use. I've heard about it before, but it seems like he's really done a deep dive.
Right, and that's the Eleusinian mysteries, I think, is his main focus, if I
Yes.
gathered my info correctly. But yeah, it definitely was very very heavily researched.
Yeah, yeah. I think reading history right now feels really appropriate because the present moment is a bit hectic, that I think it's good to get like a wider context, or just to go back in time. It feels wise right now.
Yeah, yeah. I think maybe that was an intuitive move on my part to go back a little bit. Um, yeah, well, those are great recommendations. I'm glad I got a couple more to add to the list. Um, let's see. Oh, well, that's a good kind of transition into. You mentioned your own upcoming publication, Spectra,
Yes.
and what was the kind of the genesis of that, or what was the motivation to start that concept?
Yeah.
I
So
guess
I was,
what is the concept? I guess first of all, and
yeah,
then what was the
the concept,
motivation?
yeah. Okay. So the initial inspiration behind it. So my mom has a really good friend whose daughter is in her early 20s, and she's severely autistic, and she's not able to communicate verbally, but she writes poetry as her means of communication. And she just started writing poetry in the last couple of years. And for if you can imagine having a daughter who didn't speak to you for 20 years and then just started busting out poetry, it's there's something incredible about that. So that was the initial inspiration, was finding out that there's a lot of these autistic writers who can't speak but can write. And I was thinking, oh wow, I want to provide a journal for them, or I want to provide a platform to um, get their writing out there and have more people reading what's going on in their minds, because it's so hard for them to connect with the outer world. But then I started thinking more and more and more about it, and talking to more and more people about it. And it kind of moved beyond just the autism spectrum into other spectra. So some people are third culture kids and don't really fit in a certain way. And um, I decided that it will be even cooler for the autistic writers to be featured for their writing and not just for their autism. So I decided, rather than having a journal just for autistic writers, it's a journal for anyone on any sort of spectra. Kind of, I guess a way to say it would be kind of for not misfits. I don't know if that's a good word for it, but like anyone who has a hard time connecting, whether it's with themselves or with the outside world. This is a platform to get those inner voices out. So it's called Spectra, and the idea is that it's anyone can pretty much be published in it. But I do want to use some back channels to just reach out to the autism community and say, like, hey, this is a platform where like your poetry is welcome and you can submit. And I definitely want to not prioritize, because I really want it to be for anyone to publish and get their poetry out there. I want it to be more about the poetry than the identity of the people. I think it's really cool to provide certain platforms for people of certain identities, but I do think that focusing too much on the identity could limit it in some ways. So I want to make it more about the poetry and the words and the feelings and getting those out. So that's the general concept, and I'm working on the branding and the website and everything right now. So I'm hoping within the next year, 2021, I'll have the first issue out, I hope.
Nice. So at the moment, there's not quite a website yet, but
No,
you have a personal website, but not.
Yeah, there's an Instagram. It's just
Okay.
Spectre Poets, and
Okay.
I'm going to be posting there. And the website will be spectrepoets.org. I have the URL or the domain, but I'm just working on the website.
Okay, nice.
And should be
yeah, and I do. That's a cool concept in itself. I mean, because there's a lot of publications that do poetry and stuff like that, but I think that's a good concept to get maybe somebody who wouldn't maybe normally seek out publication.
Yes.
But who might have good poems, So yeah, I think there's something. I think you're onto something there. And the other thing, is it going to be? Are you venturing into the print territory? I think you want to do a print publication.
Yes, I'm a print nerd. I love print, and I'm always collecting publications and magazines and just little zines. So I definitely will have a print edition, but I also will have online poems. But focusing on the print. Although I'm going to see how it goes with the first few issues, because I don't know. Do people buy magazines anymore? Do people actually do that, or am I just in this really strange niche of nerds who love print? I don't know.
Yeah, I think they're out there. I know that for a fact, but yeah, there definitely is something nice to have tangible. I mean, there's lots of people who would be interested in that for sure. I think that's good. Other than that, do you have any other uh, projects or things to mention?
I'm working on another article right now that will be going out most likely in Psychedelic Press UK, another psychedelic related article linking to female health and the menstrual cycle. It's a very nerdy tangent there, but super interesting. And it's yeah, that's about it. I'm going back to Mexico City in a few days because I fell in love, and it feels pretty safe COVID wise actually, which was interesting to see. Um, but it so when I went to Berlin many years ago, I instantly fell in love with the city. And as I was leaving, I decided I would need to be back quite soon. And the same thing is happening now with me in Mexico City. So it's like I have this new relationship with this city, and we'll probably be going back and forth between San Francisco and there. So just spending time there and kind of getting to know, working on my Spanish. Um, yeah, trying to I just want to survive 2020 as well. I just want 2021 to be here.
Sure, yeah, and you might get some inspiration for some new poems while you're
Yes.
there. So that should be.
Always writing. I'm always writing. There's always like the back current of things being written, even if it's total junk.
Yeah, I guess that's that's the method. You got to get it out
Yeah.
and figure out what's good later. But yeah, that sounds good. Thanks again for joining me today.
Thank you.
So I'll definitely mention your website and some of your articles maybe that we referred to at the beginning. So
Yeah. Cool.
everybody will be able to check those out as well as the closed eye open.
Cool. Thank you so
And
much.
so yeah, so thanks.
Thank you, Aaron. Have a good one.